I'm Noaki Schwartz, and I'm the Deputy Secretary for Equity and Environmental Justice at the California Natural Resources Agency. And I'm really pleased to be kicking off our first AAPI month event, which is Career Pathways for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in State Service. And we will be getting started in just a minute. I'm just going to give folks maybe a minute to join us. And we have some great speakers with us today. We've got two speakers along with a panel that's going to be moderated by one of my colleagues. So we'll just give folks another minute. Okay, well, why don't we get started? So as I said, we have a really amazing program today. But before I introduce our panelists, I want to take a minute to kind of talk about why I'm here in public service. And where I live in Long Beach, like much of California, not so long ago, a person of color like myself could not purchase a home because of language and contracts that prevented owners from selling or even renting to people of color. And I'm going to read from an actual contract that was from the 1950s from a neighborhood that is pretty close to where I live. And the quote was, "Any person of African or Asiatic descent or to any person not of white or Caucasian race," meaning that, if you were a homeowner, you couldn't sell or rent to anyone who was a person of color. And the federal government's Fair Housing Association at the time even formalized this process to include this kind of language in subdivision contracts. And these kinds of decisions really limited access to housing, beaches, and other public amenities for communities of color. And we can still really kind of see the reverberations of this today and where certain groups of people lived. And it's hard to believe in some ways, but this really happened because of decisions that people in government made. And it's really people in government now that can really help to unwind this legacy. And this is really, for me, why I'm here working in government. I really want to help my community. And this is why, I hope you will, all think about joining us here. And, government, I firmly and just passionately believe that government really needs to reflect the people that it serves. And at the California Natural Resources Agency, which is where I work, this means that we want to make sure that everyone has access to clean water, that they don't have to live in certain zip codes to enjoy California's best beaches and parks, and that all communities are safer from climate change. So with that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker. We have first Xochitl Prock. She's the California State Parks Recruitment Manager, and she's going to talk about the process. And she will be followed by Brian Aguilar, the Director of the Executive Fellows Program at Cal State University, Sacramento. And then we'll have Catherine Toy, the Deputy Secretary for Access, who will moderate a panel of some amazing state employees who can tell you about their experiences working for the state. Xochitl, you're next.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction there, Noaki. Again, I'm Xochitl Prock, the statewide recruitment manager for California State Parks, and I really appreciate you all letting me be a part of your day today. Go ahead and switch slides. Just going to go over really briefly a couple of things about California Natural Resources Agency, the types of careers that you can have under the umbrella and throughout the different departments. I'll go over briefly of the benefits and some of the options you have for being an employee with the state, specifically with natural resources, an overview of the state hiring process and where you can get assistance in navigating the system. It can have its challenges, but it is definitely worth every effort for a meaningful career under natural resources. So let's go ahead and get started about California Natural Resources Agency. With over 26 distinct departments, conservancies, and commissions, with many of the panelists from those different areas serving today, we lead the effort in stewardship of California's natural environment and to advance the governor his key policies. and specifically to restore, protect, and manage the state's natural, historical, and cultural resources for current and future generations using creative approaches and solutions based on science, collaboration, respect for all the communities and interests involved. And I read that to you all because I understand today's job seeker, their number one priority above pay is in fact working for an agency that has meaning, that has impact, that at the end of the workday, you can feel proud about the work that you do. And that's why I wanted to share this mission with you all. Whichever conservancy, department, or commission that you decide to work under, you can be rest assured that the Natural Resources Agency has that mission. So let's go ahead and talk about some of the career paths that are meaningful. And that includes, I think this is lines, if you don't mind, go ahead and clicking through. Perfect, thank you. So you can be an environmental scientist, you can be a forester, engineer, interpreter, policy analyst, and so on and so forth, even law enforcement. I'm not going to go ahead and read the whole list, but I do want to ensure that, and just share this information with you, that whatever your field of study is, whether it's administration, whether it's the STEM field, whether it's law enforcement, criminal justice, whether it's IT or the humanities, you will have a place in many of these departments, commissions, or conservatories under the natural resources path. And whatever it is, whether it's someone working in facilities and maintenance, all the way up to law enforcement, we all share the mission of protecting our resources, making sure that they're safe and clean for generations to enjoy. As Noaki had mentioned earlier, that you don't have to live in a certain zip code to enjoy our beaches and our forests. And that's what everyone under natural resources shares. Let's go ahead and move forward. Okay, so getting started, there are opportunities for those first steps, especially for the students still wondering how to get started. We have positions like seasonal aides, which are part-time positions. You can negotiate with your hiring manager how you want to use your hours. Every single department under the umbrella of Natural Resources Agency wants and encourages you to pursue your higher education. So we will work with you to negotiate how you want to work those hours. We have internship opportunities. We have student assistant positions, which is actually how I got started. There are fellowship programs, and of course you can volunteer. And something that I want to share with you, I bring this up, the volunteer option, is because whatever work experience you have, whether it's paid or non-paid, it can help you meet those minimum qualifications for some of those positions. So I do encourage you to consider volunteering even. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So some of the benefits of working with under the umbrella of natural resources and of course in state service is compensation. We have competitive salaries. Now I know you're thinking, I'm not going to get rich working for the state, and that is absolutely true, but you will have stability and you will have a balance of between work and life, because while you're making $80,000 to start with for private sector, you're working 80-hour work weeks, whereas you won't be doing that with the state. There are health benefits, including vision, health, dental for you and your family, and your family includes partners, foster children, any dependents, any of your spouse, etc. You have health benefits for you and your family. You have retirement benefits. There are education incentives for you as well to pursue higher education. There are many classifications within our departments that offer tuition reimbursement. We are fostering a culture of inclusivity, so sharing events like this and previous events, and we will carry this forward throughout the department. A lot has been done to ensure and foster a culture of inclusivity. And of course, those flexible schedules. COVID, the pandemic really helped push us into the 21st century and allowing for more telework opportunities. There is a lot more of that, so you can have that work-life balance as well. A lot of opportunity. I'm really jealous of you people coming in born at the right time. because there's so much opportunity right now for entry level and job growth. There's a lot of retirements happening. So you have huge opportunity for growth right now. And housing, there are many of the departments under the natural resources umbrella where you can have housing at a park or at one of the properties that public properties. So you can live in Monterey at a reduced fraction of the cost, specifically with California state parks, for instance. You can live at a state park with many of the classifications that we offer. Next slide, please. Okay, so quick overview of the steps to apply. First, you want to create your Cal Careers account. So just to kind of go over why this is important, many state jobs require list eligibility. What that means is you have to place yourself on a list in order for hiring managers to be able to select from. How you get on that is to first create your Cal Careers account. This is the statewide human resources system. With your account, you can create your application. You can upload many of your documents like your resume, any special certificates, a cover letter, transcripts, degrees, etc. Everything to help make your application packet successful. Next, you will take an assessment for that classification. This is how you get placed on that list. You want to take an assessment for the classification that you want to take. So for instance, if you wanted to be an environmental scientist, you would have to take the environmental scientist assessment. Then you can apply. You're eligible for the hundreds of different vacancies that we offer, hundreds of different options to choose from. And I'm going to, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. There are resources available to you. So that was a quick overview of the steps there for the state hiring process. And this is true for all state departments, whether it's under the umbrella of natural resources or Department of General Services or Caltrans. The system is pretty much the same. What's unique about the Natural Resources Agency is we have resources available to you, specifically the Career Center. We at the headquarters there downtown, 715 P Street, we have what is the Poppy Pavilion room right there in front of our building. And you can come in every Tuesday or Thursday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and we can help you there. There are real human beings there to help review your application, go over your resume. We can help you through the exam process. We can offer a mock interview, which is full resources there to help you through navigating the system. All of our departments individually have recruitment offices as well. So if you wanted to meet online virtually with a recruiter, there is assistance for you as well. So any of your questions, we can help you be successful through the hiring process there. And let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So with that, you are on your way to a rewarding career with natural resources. And I will open it up for a few moments of questions.
Yes, we actually do have one question. Sorry, where did the question go?
One of the most common questions we get regarding the Career Center is, yes, it is open to the public. There is a bus stop there. There is a RT that goes right by. There is a public garage right across the street. So there is parking available. We are open to the public. We are also open to current staff to help with their career development as well. So if you are an office technician, for instance, and you want to take that next step, we're there to help you too.
Sochi, and I found the question. I was having some technical issues. So we have a question. Are there opportunities for justice system impacted youth or applicants? Do you have any advice on how we can apply without fear of disclosing this information, or how to respond effectively to questions or biases that may block or impact our hiring with the state? Good question.
Very good question. The number one thing is the official application form, which is called an STD 678, which is every single state job you want to apply to, you have to complete this form. It does not ask the question at all. about any type of criminal history, especially if it was done as a minor. You don't ever have to disclose that information. The only time you would have to go through an extensive background investigation is if you wanted to go into law enforcement, then you would have to disclose that information. The good news is it does not automatically disqualify you. So you do want to be as truthful as possible if you're looking for a position in law enforcement, and explain, of course, what I always recommend to people, saying it was a youthful indiscretion. I've learned from it. This is how I learned from it. This is what I do to make up for that, etc. So always be truthful. The other thing, there are seasonal positions, not all of them, but some of them that do require a live scan or a DMV printout. And that is because you're specifically either working with money, or you're working with children, or you are using one of the department's vehicles to drive in. But those are very, they're looking for specific things. They're not doing a deep investigation on your background.
Great, thank you. And actually, one other question. Can you talk about the advantages of looking at limited term positions and what that means?
Yes, what a great question. Limited term means that the position is only going to be available for a certain amount of time. Usually departments offer a limited term because someone is out on extended leave for whatever reason, whether it's maternity leave, or they're out sick, or an extended amount of time. So we need that extra assistance to help someone come in. The advantage that a job applicant has for applying for the job is it's not as competitive, and it offers you that experience to help you get into a permanent position versus an entry level working your way up. So you can come in more at the journey level position and gain that experience that was very, very helpful. And oftentimes, while it's not guaranteed, there is an opportunity to become permanent right in place without having to do a lot of extra steps that are required in finding a permanent position.
And internships too, right? I mean, I think across resources, we also take in interns and fellows, and that's also, Sochi, I don't know if you want to talk about, how that can also lead to permanent opportunities as well. And it's kind of a nice way for folks to try it out, right?
Absolutely. Internships are a fantastic opportunity to gain that experience, and also seasonal positions. Both of these kind of work hand in hand. While an internship will be more focused on the specific project, a seasonal position opens up, you're working the duties of the operational need, but you can also gain other experience. And to back up a little bit, coming in at that level, staff under the Natural Resources Agency are very hopeful for your success. This is something that I've recognized with the Department of Parks and Rec and Natural Resources overall, is that we very much invest in people and helping them move forward. We want to see people be successful and come in. So that is why we try to work around college courses around your schedule. We try to, provide incentives to help you with that higher education. We have mentorship programs, whether formal or informal, to help connect you with senior staff to help you move along. One of my favorite stories to tell is I met someone who was part of the California Conservation Corps. He was a participant in there. They worked in under a memorandum of understanding with the Oceano district, helping restore some of the dunes there. The staff took a real liking to him, and they helped him move forward. They told him how to be successful. They helped teach him how to be successful in the examination process. They let him know when the examination was coming up, and he got an interview with the job. He is now leading projects, working with the CCCs there for other Corps members. And it's one of my favorite stories to tell. I think that's a perfect example of how we work with people from entry level, whether it's an internship, a seasonal position, or something like the CCCs or the ACE program or fellowships. helping them move forward.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Soshi. I was actually, you reminded me of another story. At the California Coastal Commission, which is one of the commissions that's part of resources, the current executive director actually started as a fellow. She came in as a fellow and was hired, and now she's the executive director. So I think there's probably a number of stories like that we could find across resources. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Brian Aguilar, and he's the executive director for the director, of the Executive Fellows Program at Cal State University, Sacramento. Brian, if you'd like to take it away.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I want to reiterate everything that Sochi said about natural resources. It's one of the largest, most diverse agencies with dozens of departments there. So no matter what your major is, there is a place for you at natural resources. If you like working with people, if you like working with scientists, if you like working with data, research, if you like working with educators and historians, if you like going out into nature, it's all there for sure. So I want to reiterate that. So again, thank you for having me. My name is Brian Aguilar. I'm the director of the Executive Fellowship Program and the deputy director for the Center for California Studies at Sac State. We host the Capital Fellows programs, which is what we call a gateway to public service and leadership. And I'm going to give you an overview of the 4 programs we host and how all of you could participate possibly in our program. So next slide, please. So our programs offer a unique opportunity to participate in policymaking and development. This is a public policy leadership program. So as a fellow, you would be working 10 to 11 months as a full-time paid staff member in either the state assembly, the state senate, the executive branch, which is the program I happen to run, and the judicial branch. So fellows engage in public service and prepare for future careers while getting firsthand experience in the governance and leadership of the most diverse, complex state in the nation. And you can see pictures here of fellows doing a variety of things. On the left-hand side are the judicial fellows on a court site visit in the state. The next picture over, those are executive fellows inspecting the high-speed rail construction in the Central Valley. One more step over there is an assembly fellow putting a bill across the desk. Fellows in the assembly and the legislature are involved in actually writing bills. And to the right is a Senate fellows doing some team building activities as well. Next slide, please. So the minimum qualifications to be a Capital Fellow, you must have a bachelor's degree in any major. And once again, any major. You don't have to be a policy major. You don't have to be a poli-sci major. Half of all the fellows we admit to our program come from majors like the humanities. I was an art major and I was a fellow. English majors, religious studies, the sciences. We encourage all types of folks from all types of backgrounds to participate, but minimally you must have a bachelor's degree with a GPA requirement as well. You must be 20 years of age or older by September 1 of the fellowship year. The fellowship year starts in October for 3 of the programs. Non-US citizens must provide proof of appropriate immigration status, and our programs do not meet requirements for F1 or J1 visas. Currently, the monthly stipend is $3,200 a month. We pay for you to participate in a graduate seminar in public policy or political science. We pay for those units. Those are 6 graduate units you take. So there's a seminar you take along with your fellowship placement. You get health, vision, and dental benefits and student loan deferments as well as free regional transit. Next slide, please. So the fellowship experience really, again, you're spending about the majority of your time, maybe 37 hours in an actual office. So if you're in a legislative office, you're working with a member of that legislature to advance bills, to learn about legislation, to write them, to draft them, and learn about the governing body there. In the judicial branch, you'll be participating with the administrators to run an actual court, and the executive branch will be scattered all throughout the administration from the governor's office to a variety of constitutional offices as well. We usually have roughly 40 different offices to choose from. And at the same time, all 4 programs are engaged in an academic seminar. So during this time, you're going to be learning about, from an academic perspective, everything going on, from a philosophical and theoretical standpoint of how to learn about policy and politics. And the question and the units you have are often transferable not only to Sac State, but many other institutions. Many of our fellows go on to complete their master's at USC or at George Washington University or a host of other institutions. But once you complete the fellowship program, you're awarded a graduate certificate in applied policy and government. All of the fellowship assignments are in Sacramento, so you have to be here, except for the judicial fellowship program. Their placements are in courts throughout the state. Next slide, please. So who can apply? Again, you can apply to more than one program. Many fellows will apply to 4 programs in one cycle year. Sometimes they apply to 2. It just depends on your interests. They come from all different backgrounds. You're not required to have any legislative or political experience in the past. Recent graduates, graduate students, postgraduate, and mid-career applicants are welcome to apply. Every year we have individuals who are stepping out of their careers for a couple of years to try this out. And applicants with any party affiliation are welcome to apply, including Republicans, Democrats, and people affiliated with no parties or third parties. It's totally up to you. And then the minimum qualifications we mentioned beforehand, but all this is on a website that I think we've shared the link to as well. Next slide, please. So the timeline for this is that our applications open in October, and then you have really 4 months to apply. This past year, the deadline was on February 6th. It's usually the first week in February is when the applications are due. We then do interviews for these applicants during April and early May. So right now I'm in the middle of these interviews for sure. And then mid-May, we let everyone know of their status. September, October is when the program starts. Judicial fellows start in September. And the program year goes all the way through the end of August, if not September. Next slide, please. So we're going to go through and evaluate and show you a little bit about each program and what they happen to offer for them. So the Assembly Fellowship Program is named after Jess Unruh, who was the first speaker of the full-time Assembly. He's a major political figure in California history and politics for sure. Next slide, please. And if you ever happen to see, like in the Capitol, green carpet, that means you're on the Assembly side. So the Assembly Fellowship Program, the Jess Unruh Assembly Fellowship Program, actually started in 1957. They select 18 fellows every single year, and they are placed into the offices of Assembly members. There are 80 member offices in the Assembly. As there are 18 fellows, there are actually more offices available than there are fellows. So you'll get to be part of one. They serve as legislative aides in a member's personal office or a committee consultant for a policy or fiscal committee. Fellows typically work under the mentorship and guidance of a chief of staff or legislative director. So amongst all these fellows programs, you are always assigned to a specific mentor in the office. This mentor is there to help you learn the office, to learn your roles, to be able to ask questions and support you as your year goes along for sure. So as mentioned here, you build new skills, learn the legislative process, participate in weekly academic seminar, attend weekly brown bag discussions. And this happens across all 4 programs where we introduce you to a variety of figures, individuals, officials, professionals across the political spectrum, as well as beyond, as well as professional networking and hands-on learning. The Assembly Fellows also have a Twitter account, so you should definitely follow them to learn more about them. Next slide. The California Senate Fellows, whenever you see red or red carpet, it's the Senate Fellows. So here's a lovely class of them from the 1819 program year. Next slide, please. So the Senate Fellows are very similar to the Assembly Fellows. They do a lot of the same kind of work, legislative work, working for a member or committee. The difference is that the Senate is only half as large in terms of numbers as the Assembly, but the districts they happen to represent are much, much larger. So Senate Fellows are going to be working with legislators in their districts, but their districts are more regional than they are local. And so they're going to be also involved in all the same issues and elements of the Assembly Fellows program, including drafting original legislation, learning about the history of the institution, and supporting the advancement of legislation in the building. Next slide, please. The Judicial Fellowship Program. This is the most unique of the 4 programs. There are only 10 Judicial Fellows, and the reason for this is, next slide, please. The 10 fellows are selected each fellowship year for a placement. So each of the fellows, they're not located in Sacramento. There may be 1 or 2 of them at a superior court in the Sacramento region, but they are living throughout the entire state. So if you live in Southern California and want to be a judicial fellow, you're probably going to get placed in a court in Southern California. Same thing with Northern California, same thing with Central California as well. So they serve throughout, they serve in courts throughout the state, working for the chief administrators of the court. So not with judges per se, but with the people running the actual buildings, running the actual courts themselves, making sure that folks have access to the judicial process, making sure that there's an equitable ability, there's an equitable level of transparency and access for all individuals in it, and to make sure that it runs smoothly for sure. So fellows and the Judicial Fellows Program meet once a month together at a different court every single month to engage in an all-day seminar, as well as a site visit as well. And their program starts in September and ends in July. Next slide, please. And last but not least, the program I happen to run, the Executive Fellowship Program. Just a small side note to tell you about the success of our programs and the wonderful nature of natural resources. The woman dead center on the first row, Nicole Cropper, is currently the Diversity, Education, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Director for Fish and Wildlife at Natural Resources. That's where her career has taken her after being a fellow. Next slide, please. So the Executive Fellowship Program, similar in terms of there's a mentor and there are offices you're placed in, but in the executive branch, you're placed at many, many, many different offices and agencies, as well as the governor's office. So in these offices, you're going to learn about the implementation of policy. So while writing policy is one thing in a bill, this is the part where you actually get to run the state. So you get to learn about what it takes to run an agency, what it takes to manage 3,000 people, what it takes to be able to craft legislation from the executive branch, to work on communications, budgeting, as well as project management. That is a huge element of the fellows program. So fellows in the past have taken part in everything from helping people get vaccinated during the pandemic. They've worked on transportation bills and are currently helping to work in communications for the new high-speed rail project. They've worked on criminal justice reform. They've worked on so many different projects that the state is involved in, anything the governor's involved in for sure. And so they function as full-time professional staff in these offices, and it really depends upon what kind of skills you want to learn. So they're available to you throughout them, and there are 18 fellows, and they're all here in Sacramento. Some offices and buildings are scattered for sure, but they're around. With that, last slide, please. So as you can see, like these right here are our hashtags and some of our contact information to be able to reach our fellows programs. This is an older slide for sure. We're updating our information because we just closed the recent application process. But if you have questions about this, you're more than welcome to reach us. We take students, we really do prioritize ourselves in trying to ensure that every student class that we bring in of fellows, every cohort, all 64 of them, reflect our state. They reflect the diversity of our state. They reflect the diversity of experiences, of majors, of everything, because the only way in which good policy and good government functions is if it's representative of the people. And so we take many, many, many different perspectives in that. Our selection committees do so. We really do care about that. So for all of you interested in this program, it's really great. This is a leadership development program. So we really are looking at someone who's thinking of themselves as a future leader in public service. But for sure, if you apply, you don't get in, you can always apply again. Every single year, I know within my own program, I have 2 or 3 applicants who've applied multiple years. You can only be a fellow once, but you can apply as many times as you like. And if you don't feel comfortable like applying right now fresh out of undergrad, you're welcome to wait a couple of years. I myself was a working adult when I applied for the fellowship program. I was 31 years old, and I said, this is something I want to try and be involved in. And here I am today. So again, our contact information is embedded in the chat, I believe, but if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Brian. And if you do have questions, feel free to, just drop them in the chat. That was a really fantastic presentation. The program sounds amazing. I wish I had known about this when I was younger. And I was really just pleased to hear that, folks can really, come in with no experience doing this work and, just a range of majors. One question I had is I noticed that the application deadline ended in February. So, for folks that you've gotten all excited and are interested now, is there a second application period or will they have to wait until next year?
They'll have to wait until next year. But again, the application period opens for an entire 4 months. So it will open it the first week of October and close it the first week of February. We may be moving up the deadline in the future just to make sure people find out information earlier. But that's what we're looking at right now. Yeah.
Great. And then when do they usually hear back?
They'll hear back by usually the second week, if not the third week of May. But again, we're trying to advance that and move that forward so that people get information closer to the end of April, just so people can make decisions around, graduation or anything of the sort. So.
And we do have one question. What makes applicants stand out?
What makes an applicant stand out? Well, we get a lot of applications. And so restating we have a portal on there in your application to upload your resume. But we ask for personal statements from folks. And what's most important is communicating, one, if you're going to apply to the Senate Fellows Program, why the Senate? Why not the Assembly? What is about the Senate Fellows Program and what they happen to offer that you really appeals to you? What is it, if you're applying to the Executive Fellowship Program, what is about what our program has to offer that really appeals to you? But the big thing is that you want to make a difference in the lives of people in California, right? Why do you want to make a difference? How has public policy affected you? Really talking about yourself and what you're going to bring to the fellowship program, your passions, your experiences, and your desire to make a difference. That really sets fellows apart for sure, and applicants as well. Again, we read a lot of applications and we interview a lot of people, but that's really important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm really grateful that you took the time to come here today to speak with us all. And just as an aside, to Brian's point, I actually came in, I was a print journalist for a long time, and I actually came and started as an agency in their communications department. And then eventually they asked me, if I'd like to start working on policy. So even if, you start at this position, you can move into other areas, if something really kind of grabs you. But thank you again. So I'm going to pivot to our next speaker, Catherine Toy. She's going to be moderating a panel with a number of really fantastic AAPI state employees.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Noaki. Hi, everyone. It's terrific to be here on our first kickoff event for Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here at the Natural Resources Agency. And I'm thrilled to have with me today on the panelists 3 terrific colleagues. They are Erin Aquino Carhart from the Wildlife Conservation Board, Amrita Spencer from the California Coastal Commission, and Nita Barr from the Office of Spill Prevention and Response. And I will give them each the opportunity to introduce themselves to you all, and then we'll get started. I'm just gonna go alphabetically here by last name. So Erin, you should be familiar with that. Why don't you introduce yourself, Erin? Tell everybody a little bit about, what's a high-level mental picture of what you do and what's kind of your typical day. What do you like about it? Maybe what would you, not your favorite things about the job too. You could share that if you want.
Thank you, Catherine. So as she said, I work for the Wildlife Conservation Board, or WCB, because, at the state and government, we love our acronyms. I am a senior environmental scientist, and I manage a grant program for the state of California. So what we focus on is restoration for habitat and developing public access for people to use for trails, for accessing natural areas throughout the state. But primarily my work focuses on the San Joaquin River Parkway, and that's in the Fresno and Madera areas. So a typical day, I'm doing a lot of managing on the computer and on sitting at a desk, but I still do get to go outside and check out my projects and see the beautiful areas that we're restoring.
Awesome.
So
Thanks so much for sharing.
It's a good mix.
Yeah. That I certainly think that's one of the things that folks like about jobs in our departments, that you often do get to spend some time both inside and out. Nita, can I move to you next? Introduce yourselves to the audience.
Thank you, Catherine, so much. I am Nita. I'm the GIS supervisor for the Office of Spill Prevention Response. We provide GIS help, which is Geographic Information System. We provide maps for the Office of Spill Prevention Response. We are an emergency response crew, so if any oil spill happens on any waters in the state of California and the beach up to, I think, 3 miles, we do respond, and we work under a incident command system structure, so we have to provide maps for anything required. So that's how we manage our natural resources. So we want to know what kind of listed species or listed animal, bird, and one of our special importance we give in our response is the sea otters, which, as Erin said, you get to go outside. I got to go outside to do some sea otter recon surveys so we could create maps for the sea otters. So I also work at a desk most of the time. We get in all these GIS map requests from our groups, so I kind of get to triage all the like manage people, the best part, I guess, of my job, which I like, and be part of a group where we respond to natural disasters and hopefully help to restore it as much as we can to the next future generations. And that's it, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's the kind of thing where you always don't want to have something that you have to respond to, but the fact that the state is prepared,
Yes,
if and when
as a
it
part
does
of
happen, is what
yes,
it's all
as a
about.
part of that, we have preparedness, what we call. So we have like general, like we do all these GIS applications, have them ready so we can collect data in the field for any disaster happens. So thank you.
There's so many interesting jobs in the Natural Resources Agency that I would never have had any clue about until I started working here, and yours is certainly one of those. Amrita, I would love to have you introduce yourself to everyone. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. Well, I'm Amrita Spencer, and I'm a district supervisor at the California Coastal Commission. Our agency, quite broadly, we evaluate development all over the coastline, and by development that can range from anything from residential commercial development to wetland restoration projects, new hotels, beach concession stands, or beach access ways, etc. We evaluate those types of development projects to ensure that there are no impacts to coastal resources, such as public coastal views, public access, sensitive habitats, mitigation from climate change, and so on and so forth. It's a really fascinating job, and you get to wear a lot of hats. A lot of our employees work mainly as, kind of in urban planning, but you have to wear a geology hat, you have to wear a biology hat, public policy hat, legal hat. So you get to kind of dabble in a lot of things. I like to think of it as a sort of like systems engineer of sorts, but within the realm of government. I love personally, interfacing with local governments to work on long-range coastal planning projects. I think a lot of people can agree, but sometimes it's not always fun to do just straight paperwork, but comes with the job, as with many jobs in state government. So
I get that. Well, thank you all for sharing a little bit about what you do. I'll add my own a little bit to that, and then look forward to getting into some questions and digging in a little bit about each of your experiences. So yeah, I am California's Deputy Secretary for Access, and that means I work directly in the Office of Secretary of Natural Resources, Wade Crowfoot, as a policy deputy. And that means my job in particular is to look at how we're going to embed a strategy for equitable access to the outdoors for all California. So I've been here a little bit over a year, and my job is a political appointment. So earlier today, we heard Sochi talk about our Career Center and how that works for a lot of the roles that we have within the Natural Resources Agency. But some of our jobs are also what are considered political appointments. So I think Geeta's maybe going to drop in a link there in the chat. This is a little bit, maybe I suppose a much smaller percentage of roles are these, but they are not only some of the policy positions in our departments and at the agency, but also they are positions on our natural resource agencies, boards and commissions and councils. And so that's something that probably a lot of people don't know that much about. And it was something that I really honestly didn't know about either. So, I never expected to be in government service. I'll say I've spent a lot of my time in public service, but not in government service. So prior to this role, I spent many years in the nonprofit sector, and I actually began my career as a history teacher. So I used to tell my students, everyday people make history every day. And as a 7th grade middle school teacher, you can imagine I got a lot of eye rolls about that. It's such a teacher thing to say. But I really wanted my students to see that they saw themselves in history. It wasn't just old people and dead people, but in fact, the decisions that each of us, our parents, our neighbors, the grocery store clerk, your librarian, make each and every day, and the cumulative impact of those decisions are in fact what make history, and that we each have a role to play in that. So I've really spent my life at the intersection of public and volunteer and community engagement, and really charting paths for people to see themselves in history and in the history that we're living each and every day right now. So that's kind of how I got here, but it's a little bit interesting because sometimes I find myself in the natural resources department, and my background in entering parks and open space really came from the cultural resource side. And I first began working with state parks, oh gosh, more than 25 years ago, like half my lifetime ago, on the nonprofit side in the restoration of the U.S. Immigration Station at Angel Island. So that's how I got to be here. But, you know, in this particular role, and I would love to next have some of you, my fellow panelists, talk about, you know, what inspired you in your role and how you got to learn about it. For me, you know, immediately prior to this, I was the deputy CEO at the Golden Gate National Parks Conservancy in San Francisco, which is one of the big nonprofits, friend groups to the National Park Service there. And I had a great job. I love my colleagues and I really enjoyed what I was doing. It was challenging, but when the state came knocking at my door and, you know, someone said, hey, this position is open, this appointment, are you interested in pursuing it? And I first said, no, actually, I said, no, not really interested in doing that. But, you know, something happened to me in my life then that really drove me to change my mind. And that was in the summer of 2021. My stepdaughter and I were both the targets of anti-Asian hate on the streets of San Francisco. And this is a city that 5 generations of my family has called home. You know, my grandfather first remembers, he was born in San Francisco before the 1906 earthquake. And when he was 3 years old, remembers leaving Chinatown on the back of a wagon to go live in a park. He later went on to be an engineer and help build the Oroville Dam, actually. So that's kind of cool. And there's James putting up a picture of my grandfather there in the middle in the 1960s, who worked for a related agency of natural resources for the department. So in that, though, I would really like to say that, you know, in that moment of experiencing that on the streets of San Francisco, I was really both heartbroken and, you know, angry and sad. And then I just got mad. And I was like, if I have the ability to change something to make, you know, others feel more welcome and comfortable and feeling like they belong, then I've got to try. And that was really the impetus for me to be in the job and to saying yes to pursuing this role, was that, you know, how do we create a sense of belonging in our public and civic spaces? So I think we all have different reasons for doing the work that we do. And, you know, I'd love to hear from some of you, what, you know, inspired you to take this role? Were you always interested in government service? Were some of your families, you know, I know some of us with, you know, Asian American Pacific Islander backgrounds, particularly those folks with immigrant parents, sometimes that's not the most comfortable thing. What are your experiences with that? Erin, you know, is that something that you thought about, government service, when you were in school, or how did you come into it?
Honestly, I did not think about government to begin with. I've always loved nature and being outdoors. It was just something that felt so calming and so, I mean, for lack of a better term, natural to be in nature. And it's funny because when I was in school as a biology major, there were other Filipino people in the coursework, but they were all going into nursing. And you know, and people commonly associate Filipino people with nurses, and which is a great profession, but wasn't for me. But where there is connectivity is that I love helping people. I love making connections, and definitely like getting people outside, out to enjoy nature and these spaces that I love. Like, it's something that I wanted to do something to protect, to do something to spread the word, to make this available for more generations, for more people like me, and just not have it exclude anybody. And I think it's just something that you notice that maybe in some of these spaces, you don't see a lot of people that look like you. But when you go back to like the Philippines or other countries, there's a lot of people who are going outdoors, and it's very common there. So it's just like, where's the disconnect? So that's something that I've been really interested in. But I also sorry.
And when you were thinking about this, and was that something that your family thought, yeah, you should pursue this career path?
I mean, my family is supportive, but definitely going into government work was not like their initial thoughts for me. I think they were more concerned that I was like fed and housed, and that I had something that was a bit more profitable. Yeah, I do have immigrant parents, so definitely like it wasn't something commonplace. But I mean, my family back home, I have family members in government through politics, but as far as being more bureaucrats, like that wasn't really a common thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that in your story, and I'm glad that you got to a place where you could merge your interests and really pursue something that was meaningful to you. And Marita, how about you? Was this your career path in public service?
Definitely not, but my interest kind of comes full circle in a way. So I guess to start out with, I'll just note that I grew up in Huntington Beach, in Southern California. A lot of my childhood was spent, at the beach. I loved the beach. My dad loved the beach. I inherited his love for the beach. And I would always see, kind of ongoing conflicts between developers and activists, especially, in the Bolsa Chica wetlands. And I was always kind of interested in it because I like going to the wetlands and watching birds that I don't know how to identify, but I never really thought too much about it. So, I went through high school and college, kind of, following the, ever so common push to be in STEM. My dad was an aerospace engineer, and I'm sure he wanted me to be the same thing. And I was always more drawn to, the social connection and helping people. I like to volunteer a lot. I started out my first semester in college as an astrophysics major, and I was not good at physics at all. And so, I was kind of going through the course catalog, decided to switch my major to environmental studies because it seemed really cool. The classes seemed fun. And I kept thinking about the beach. And then fast forward to, grad school. I was out of state. I was in grad school in DC. And I started I would always listen to NPR stations from, back here just to feel connected to, home in Southern California. And I kept hearing about the Coastal Commission. At the time they were working on the big Banning Ranch project. And I was like, what is the Coastal Commission? I looked it up. I looked up all the work they did. And lo and behold, the Coastal Commission did a lot of work in the Bolsa Chica wetlands, the very same work that I had watched as a kid. And I decided,
amazing.
Yeah. And I thought, wow, this is a sign. I have to work here. And I guess that's kind of where I got to where I am.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that story that was something that you followed and were, so personally close to, way before you ended up as a staff person at the Coastal Commission. So that's pretty incredible. I think in some of these jobs we have experiences where either from our personal time that we can we follow that interest, and other times where we're in something that we want to be in and we're still, of course, learning or gaining experience as we go and being put into some unfamiliar circumstances. And some of those might be around our own identity as Asian American Pacific Islanders, or, here on the screen here, we're all women as well. And I'm interested in that intersection of our identities and how that might interplay with how you show up at work or some of the experiences that you may have had at work. I know for me, when I first started out as the first executive director of the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation 25 plus years ago, that was my baby self. I was, often in this, we were in a three-way partnership between our little nonprofit and the National Park Service and California State Parks. And I would go to these planning meetings of like 20 people on this preservation project. And I was usually the only woman, the only person of color, and the only person under 40 in the room with like 20 people. And I would feel that so intensely. And also being the person representing the community and the partnership engaged with two big government agencies. So, I don't know if you've been in those circumstances where you really feel your identity at work. How have you, how has that shown up for you? Nita, you have some thoughts about that?
Well, I will definitely say that being the only woman sometimes is challenging. And when I started with state parks, as you said, you were the only woman. As an environmental scientist, when I started, I was like one of the two women of like Asian descent being an environmental scientist. So it was very overwhelming for myself. And I kind of like, coming from Asian background, fighting all the stereotypes that I had to be an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer, which I did not want to be. And I was the only one in my grad program at that time doing environmental studies. And so, yes, that's, I guess, one of the, I won't say battles, but just, battles with ourselves and battles. I guess you wanted to prove yourself that you can do it, like, and, just being the one taking control and saying, hey, I can do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to move ahead. And so I definitely go ahead.
Being one of the onlys or very few, do you find that you are either showing up differently than you would either show up in other spaces, or do you have to make your, like psych yourself out to like, oh, I have to do something against my drink?
The only thing I would say is, like, I guess I was always followed my heart, and I would do whatever I wanted to do. So I would be by myself, like, or I'll be myself. I didn't have to do anything extra. And I think I bring to the table is my empathy and compassion for people. And I think that says a lot, and for myself in a lot of different ways. And so I followed my path. And as everyone said, I wanted to be in state service, but not here. I wanted to be back in my country. But, I moved here. I started as a volunteer, and I know Sochi was mentioned before in our presentation, good opportunity to start as a volunteer. So, I started as a volunteer, became a service intern. And then when I became a volunteer, and, coming back to state parks, I worked more than 500 hours and I got a free pass to state parks because I worked more than 500 hours. So I guess I put my name out there that I want to work for the natural resources and save whatever I want to do. And I worked as an environmental scientist, and then I moved on to become a research data specialist. And I never thought of becoming a GIS supervisor, thanks to my husband and a good friend of mine. They're like, hey, you need to put your name in the pot. I'm like, no, it's okay. I'll be fine. And you know what? I thank my boss, my friends, my husband, my family, everywhere, even though they kind of were not sure which way I was heading. Here I am. And I would definitely say, coming from a Asian background, I had my own struggles, had my own fights, and I was not in the IT realm where you're supposed to be typically. I did not want to do that. And yeah, it has been a good ride so far, and I have the gratitude and appreciation for what I am at this point. And definitely it's follow your heart and just, fight it. Like, you will get it. I know sometimes it takes time, but hey, you're going to get what you want if you're really strong-willed and, you know, you have a good heart kind of thing. Just keep going.
I love that, Nita. Yeah, I love that you really stayed with something that was in your heart and pursued it, and continue to show up as yourself in these places, even when sometimes I imagine it's uncomfortable being the only.
Yeah, and coming from India, you do not get a lot of humor sometimes, being not born and brought up here. It's different, and just to like understand, and you know, I guess you just follow your work. There's some part of humor I may not have gotten. I may have said something wrong at the wrong place, and thanks to my coworkers, colleagues, friends, they corrected me, and they're like, you know, you cannot say this. And I'm like, oops, I'm sorry. And, you know, just being humble that, you know, I made a mistake and I'm truly sorry for what I said, or just, you know, be yourself. That's more important than anything, if that's all matters, I guess, at the end of the day. And humanity, I know it's a big word, but yes, it comes down to being human.
I mean, that is definitely something to think about, right? That when we know that we have such a diversity of our colleagues, how are we open and generous in our thinking? We are all sometimes in a learning space, and sometimes you hear things from someone that you don't understand, or maybe like, what? Like, what was that about? And not to use it as a learning opportunity, both on the receiving end and on the giving end. Erin, how about you? Have you, in your role, do you feel like in your identity you ever show up differently in the workplace, or that affects
definitely
how your work?
I think earlier on in my career, I did have that same experience that you described, where I was like the only one in the room, or I was noticeably the youngest in the room. And so it really changed how I behaved, that I kind of shrunk back. Like I, rather than speaking out on things, I was very conscientious of my place, I guess, at this table. Even though I was invited to be part of this conversation, I made sure to wear makeup and dress up for all of these meetings, because I didn't want to appear like I was a child. And it was something that really, I don't know, it was really in my head. But I think in time, and because I kept getting invited to these kinds of things and getting opportunities, you find your voice and you get encouraged to be there. And I think it's been because I've had such wonderful supervisors and managers that gave me these opportunities, that like I kept feeling empowered to speak up and to take some space. Because definitely culturally, you're told, you know, to like hang back and let like elders take the front seat, or that you have to wait your turn. But that's really not what it's about. We want more voices. We want to include everybody and I mean, that's what we're talking about now. It's like a seat at the table for our theme. And so, yeah, so just even allowing myself to envision somebody like me in a higher office, in a higher role, it's huge. Like I didn't do that before. And it was probably because I didn't see a lot of that before. And it's wonderful to see people like you, Catherine, and so many people in our resources agency leadership within this community. So I just find it so inspiring.
Yeah, well, thank you, Erin. And you know what you said about, gosh, when I was younger, or you know, as a young person coming in, being the youngest person in the room, you always both feel that and try to, in some cases, even look older by dressing older. And I definitely relate to that, because when I taught middle school, people used to think I was an 8th grader sometimes. I was 22 years old.
How did you get away with that? How did you get away with that?
but like you said, Erin, sometimes I literally like probably wore more makeup or dressed even older than I would want to, just so to try to have people not think I was a student.
Right.
But you know, it makes us question sometimes our own instincts and thoughts. And it is something I know, even myself, 30 something years into my career, this is my first time working in government. And what I find is that it is actually, there's so much insider language, not being either familiar with a lot of natural resource work or just the insider language of government.
Like the acronyms.
The acronyms that you said, it's like, you're so right. Government likes an acronym. And so even in my role 30 years on, I'm still thinking, I'm not sure what that is. And, I think sometimes we question, as, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, is it my identity as a woman of color, or is it, just me personally, that sometimes we feel like we have to know everything before we start talking, right? And that is hard sometimes, or we question our own knowledge.
Right.
And sometimes I think that, culturally, as Asian Americans in this country, right? I mean, Asians weren't allowed to be naturalized citizens in this country until the 1940s, and in some cases the 1950s. And so many people don't even know that. And we were taught there's this generational history based on the history of Asians in this country. Hey, be quiet, be a good girl, don't make waves, and just like sink into the background. And so I think sometimes in our roles that can be hard to overcome even 100 years later, right? So
it's interesting you bring this point up, Catherine. I took a class in Asian history, and just the way things have come here, or even like how things have progressed here, it's amazing. And it's good to know like what the history is, and just be appreciative how lucky we are for what we can gain as we grow as a community, as everything. So it's very important.
And I think that is one of the things that so many folks don't know, is what is the history of Asian Americans in this country, right? So when someone told my daughter to go back from where she came from, right? Well, this is where she came from. So, I think we've all had those microaggressions in our lives where people are like, oh, where are you from? And say, Redwood City. Oh, I mean, where were your parents born? Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Oh, I mean, your grandparents. Milwaukee, San Francisco, Bakersfield, right?
Where are you really from?
Yeah, where are you really from?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
I've gotten that question since I was like in grade school. I could remember as early as like being 4 or 5 getting the question, where are you from, or which one are you, Chinese or Japanese? And I'm like, oh, you get taken aback. And I don't know, like I get people are curious, but there's more appropriate ways to phrase that question, I think.
For sure.
I would say they would consider me, they considered me like, I guess, Mexican too. Like, oh, you look something like that. So
yeah. So if you're
like,
ever curious, if you're ever curious, don't guess. And you can ask like, hey, I'm interested in your identity. Like, I think that's an appropriate question. Just like, I'm interested in your cultural background. And ask about that if you're searching for the right kind of question. I think that's
it's teaching your kids too, as you said, Catherine, when your daughter was asked, like, just teaching my son to be growing up, it's important. So
it is. When we think about, and Erin, this was something you had mentioned, I'm curious about maybe, Amrita, if you've had in your experience people who have been mentors or people who've been important in your own professional development along your career path.
Yeah. I guess I can start. It's funny because one person who comes to mind just right off the bat is my dad. He kind of went through his own, path. I mentioned he was, an engineer, but growing up, his family wanted him to be a doctor, and they were so mad that he did not want to be a doctor that I think my dad and my grandpa didn't speak for 25 years because of it. It was pretty insane. And so you know, I think my dad just was really passionate, like truly passionate about what he did. And, just throughout his whole career, he'd always just, put in not just the work ethic, but the heart into it too. He's kind of he's very knowledgeable in engineering. He could talk for hours and hours and no one would know what he would talk about, but he kind of instilled the importance of, being truly interested in what you want to pursue as a career. So, when it came time for me to choose my own career, of course, he was a bit sad that I did not go the STEM route, but he understood where I was coming from because he had to do the same thing. And it, got to the point where he kind of educated himself on what I was interested in. And, to this day, he'll send me articles about, climate change and, things like that and say, oh, well, have you been working on this? And so it's nice to have that.
Oh, cool.
Sort of integration and, kind of sharing of knowledge in both directions. I know it's not always very common, in Asian and Pacific Islander cultures. And so that's just something that I'm really, really grateful for.
That is so cool to have that. Nita, do you have people who've inspired or supported you in your career?
Well, I would just say my parents were not happy that I left engineering school. And when I came in a math major, I saw this teacher, he was from Israel, and he was like, just follow your heart. And I'm like, I guess so. And I guess I also wanted to go rogue in a way because my mom and my dad were like, oh, you have to be an engineer. I'm like, I will show you, I'm not going to be an engineer. I'm going to do something else. And so it came back to liking nature and saving the natural resources. And I did my math major and came back to environmental studies, and that's how I pursued it. And so I was like, I can do this. It's not just engineering or doctor is the end of the world. There are other fields out there which can make everybody happy, and going camping, going out is important. Yeah, my professor did tell me, and thanks to my husband too, follow your heart, do what you want to do, just do it.
That's really important to have those people in your lives who, encourage you to be who you want to be and follow your heart. I know that, sometimes that feels difficult perhaps for some people around us to do, but it is wonderful to have that encouragement. And I think, I would encourage all of you who are younger in careers than say me, than I am. One of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is to think back on the people who were really important in my career when I was starting out, and to pay that back, right? To try to help young people, especially as they're starting their careers. And so for anyone who ever reaches out to me on my LinkedIn or through a contact, I always will sit down with them and have an informational interview, because people did that for me. And I'm certainly always appreciative of that, or just, folks who took me under their wing when I was young and were that mentor for me. It's a good reminder for me now, coming into the last third of my career, to do the same. So I wonder, before we go, I'd love to pose this to each of you. What are you most proud of in your work and what you do? What would you, and what advice, some of you have provided that already, would you give to someone else starting out or thinking about a state career? Nita, you want to jump in?
God, that's a hard one. So I would say I'm proud of where I am at, and I like to help people. I think, as you said, was that informational interview, if anybody asked me a question, I want them. So I guess one of the mistake I did in a way was kind of going abroad and studies with the exchange student program. And if that is something I try to tell kids do it, explore different options. Just there's not only one thing, there are 5 different things out there. Explore it, volunteer. If I know it's hard, but try to get an internship, a paid internship with what you like, so that way you know you can decide if this is something you want to pursue. And I guess in a way, be focused, be truthful, follow your heart, and you will find it. You will get it there. But have an open mind. Like, just don't be like, this is all. Have an open mind, and you will get there. So
Thanks
it's
so
hard.
much. Yeah.
It's hard, and be consistent and have a discipline moving ahead. That definitely makes a difference.
Okay. Amrita, how about you? What are you most proud of in your work? What advice might you have for other folks thinking about starting out in their careers at the state?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing for me is I'm just proud of, how the work that I've done with the Coastal Commission actually, impacts almost every Californian. It's really nice to go to the beach and, enjoy a truly public space without, someone's house right in the middle of it. So that's just one thing I really like. I love going to all the sites that I worked on and just see kind of how it's come to fruition. And I guess in terms of, advice, I think it's really important to, you need to, of course, prepare for a career generally, but I think, it's easy to become discouraged if, you set too strict of, expectations. Yes. Or like a very specific role, like, by the age of 25, like, I'm going to be at this point in my life in this job, because the reality is, there's a lot of different paths to get to the same place. And even if you don't, go down the path that you think you're going to take, or you think is the most fruitful or direct path, you do learn a lot of, you get a lot of experience and just wisdom and knowledge along the way. And so it's just what I wanted to throw out there.
Cool. Erin, you want to bring us home on that?
Yes, thank you. So I am most proud of the relationships that I've made in my profession. I think what people don't often see is that it's a very human and person-oriented job, and that it's all about collaborating with others and making connections and working through negotiations and figuring some like really tough situations out. And, we go into sciences for these kinds of positions, but we definitely need all types of people. And I think something I love to highlight for people is that I'm a generalist. I studied conservation biology. I did not go on to an advanced degree, and I would have hangups about that personally, because I would worry, I don't have a master's, I don't have a PhD, could I really do this? But in actuality, like, if you have the passion for it, if you care about helping people and doing the right thing and making something that's reasonable, something that works, like, you don't worry about it being perfect. That's definitely something that we need to just stop, but like, do something that's like practical, like something that, you put the good work and effort into, and you can step back and see the fruits of your labor. So don't, and also just ask questions. Like, if you assume somebody's going to say no, that's the worst they could say to you. So just go ahead and ask. If you want copies of somebody's paper that you hit a paywall, email the author. They'll most likely just send you a PDF. Like, if you're wondering about a job or how to do something, just let people know, and they'll be happy to assist.
I love that. Don't be shy about asking, right? The worst you could hear is no. Yeah, and I think so often we get in our own way, right? Yes. Like, we build or at least I often do, build all these questions about why someone's going to think you're, I don't know, what it is, right? But maybe get out of our own way,
Yes.
ask the questions. And I think, so often what I've learned too, as my career has progressed, is that some of what others appreciate the most, and particularly, so many of you've highlighted the importance of relationships, and even in leadership, is around being willing to be vulnerable and to just show yourself for who you are. And if you don't have the answers, to say you don't have the answers and work with that. And that's okay. And I think so often we find ourselves wanting to have the perfect answer, or everything solved before we will even talk about it. But that's not realistic, right? And that's not a realistic expectation for ourselves or to show as an example. So thank you all for sharing your stories with us today. And I know, Noaki, I'm going to pitch this back to you, and we may have some questions out there for anyone, including Brian and yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was a wonderful discussion. So we do have a couple questions. The first question is, how easy is it to move between departments and I guess conservancies and other entities, once you're working for the state? And is Sochi still here?
Yeah. And I know Nita moved between departments, and I don't know
Yes,
if you want to
do,
take,
yeah.
and Aaron did too. Okay,
Yeah,
so
I did too.
That's right.
But yeah, so very quickly, I was actually a journalist, as I mentioned before, and then I came to the Coastal Commission, and I was in their communications department, and then I started working on policy, and I became by the time I left, I was the deputy director for communications, environmental justice, and tribal affairs. So I started working on both environmental justice and tribal affairs. And now I'm at the Natural Resources Agency with Catherine, and I'm the Deputy Secretary for Equity and Environmental Justice. So you can definitely, move around. And I think, Nita, you've done the same, like you've moved as well.
Yes, I was an environmental scientist with California State Parks before I came to Department of Fish and Wildlife. I wouldn't say it's easy, but you just have to find the niche, what you like, and it's easy. Once you know what you want, it's fairly possible that you can move. Like, I didn't know that until I applied, and I was like, oh, I can do that. And everything just got transferred. I'm like, wow, that was easy. And I guess that's the perk of being in a state system. Like once you are in it, it's easier to move around and I think the part where I didn't realize that you have return rights too for your job when you are when you take a new job. There's like a period of time where if you fail probation or you decide not to, clear probation, you can go back to the job you had within a certain amount of time. So I don't know whether this is a place to say that, but I think that's also an important part of being in state service.
So with a number of jobs in state service, there's a probationary period, meaning, it's just kind of a trial period to make sure that it sort of is working for both parties. And if you decide, if you're moving between departments and decide, hey, this isn't quite working out for me, you can actually go back to your old job. And what I found actually what was nice about taking this new position was that, all of the insurance and everything else just sort of came with me.
Yes,
which was really great, and all the benefits. So it was like it's a bit of a it's some work initially to kind of get into the state, but once you're there, it's not as difficult to move. Yes. And then does anyone else have anything else to add to that? We have another question too. We have time for maybe one more. And this is a good question. What experiences have you had, and what skills have you developed that prepared you for all the jobs that you have today? I don't know, Catherine, you want to try that one? I feel like you bring a lot of skills, and
I guess I'm probably actually the person with the least state service part on the screen, even though I'm the oldest person here, probably. So, yeah, I used to think that maybe the things that tied my career together were kind of strange, or maybe wasn't a path. But now I see it, and it really is kind of what I referenced before, which is it's all tied back to really my belief that if we live here, right, and we have the right to vote, then we ought to be going out there and doing our civic duty. But if you don't feel like you belong in a place, it's hard to care about that place, you know. And I think about nature in general. Nature is good for people. We have distinct public health outcome differences between those who have ready access to nature and those who don't. But if you're not comfortable in that space, or if other people don't make you comfortable in that space for a variety of reasons, you're not going to care about that, right? You're not going to be contributing, whether it is to, conserving our environment, protecting our special places, or being a part of a solution to our civic challenges and opportunities. And I think, might be hyperbolic to say, but I believe it, which is, our civic and public spaces are really essential for democracy. They matter. It matters that we all feel like we belong in this great state and in this country in order for us to get out there and all play our part. We can't leave it to someone else, right? It has to be for us. And so that's, to me, what I've taken along the way, is really to say, how do you engage people in participating in civic life, right? And are there things that you need to do that we're responsible for as government for helping people to see that, to feel like they belong and that they have a seat at the table, and therefore, are part of that great sort of experience.
Great answer, Catherine, and thanks for also touching on our theme, a seat at the table. Brian, I would love for you, since we haven't heard much about your kind of personal journey, I would love to hear, how you said you started as a couple fellow, and now you are where you are today. I'd love to kind of hear about how that happened for you.
Certainly. My career started working with kids. So I worked for the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Sacramento. I'm a Sacramento native. Went to school in Los Angeles, but became really invested and involved in college preparation for youth and for low-income marginalized youth. So I worked for the Upward Bound programs at UC Davis and at Stanford University. But as I became more involved, as many people do, in trying to affect a community, you realize that policies that are affecting our communities and that we're trying to work with are sometimes barriers if you don't quite understand them. And I think I had the ultimate question most people do is, what the heck are they doing in Sacramento, right? And so I was already at a phase of my career where I was like, I think I need to figure this out before I go forward. I'm never going to be a well-rounded, educational equity professional unless I understand how policy affects what we're working with. And so after working on a couple of campaigns nationally to improve and increase the amount of college preparation or funding for college preparation for students, I applied to be a fellow, and the fellowship program meant to kind of what you're sharing in terms of looking at different career paths and maybe matching your skill sets to them and trying new things. I was placed in the state treasurer's office, where I learned about municipal bond finance, which doesn't exactly align with what my career path was originally. But I learned so much about public policy and how we pay for things and how the function of the executive branch and how policy is created at a state level. And it was a tremendously eye-opening experience for me in that regard. And then after I worked for a couple of divisions of the treasurer's office that were working on increasing financing for higher education nonprofit institutions like USC, like Whittier College, like Stanford, and a great deal many others, and also for the Scholarship Investment Board, which runs the state college savings plan. So I kind of found higher education finance in the state treasurer's office. For sure, but then rolled into this when this opportunity came about to be able to, one, go back to my roots as an educator at the same time in this public policy intersection as well, it seemed pretty timely for me to be able to do so, and I've enjoyed doing it. This is my 10th year running this program for sure, and
Wow,
fellows.
nice.
Wow.
Yeah, and a great deal many, and a great deal many fellows. You know, we place a play at Natural Resources over my time there for sure. Some of them have been hired on and moved on, but really, it's I think it's great to be able to see young professionals. Like the goal of my program for sure is to help young professionals to realize that they have skill sets and abilities right now that translate to policy, that translate to public service, that translate to the kind of work that Natural Resources provides as an agency. But then also to reveal new ones, to discover new capacities that you have to be able to apply to these areas. And then for yourself and for having done that, being able to say, okay, now what am I going to do with my career? Now that I know I have more ways in which I can contribute to so many different communities, including the communities I happen to care about, with these new skill sets and the skill sets I already possess. What can I do next? So
well said.
Thing.
Yeah, and I think with that, we're at time, and that's actually, I think, the perfect way to end. You know, that it's really important to bring your whole self to your job, and really, you know that all those skills and all those passions that you have, you can bring to the state and to continue to develop those passions. I mean, again, you know, I fully was not expecting to be doing environmental justice work, and here I am, and it's become, you know, just the passion of my life. So thank you all for being here today. This was just a really wonderful time to spend with all of you. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.